today's meeting. So today we'll be talking about some liquidity formation. So once we are done with liquidity, then we can teach about Wyckoff, how to know when Wyckoff is forming and the type of Wyckoff is forming. So now, firstly, you have to understand your structure. Now let's take, for example, on gold. You have to understand the formation on higher time frame. From this monthly time frame, you notice that we are bullish. Now around this area, you notice this was the only area market gave any deep pullback. Only area market gave a deep pullback. So today what we are doing is liquidity. So liquidity. So liquidity is what we're doing today. So in terms of liquidity and inducement, so firstly you have to master your structure, which we have done already. But liquidity perfect sum. Now we have a lower high, a higher high to the upside. Now around this area, this was the last area market gave a BMS to the upside. So as market is coming back now, because this one now did not retrace back into the former range, it didn't give any deep pullback into the former range. That means it did not take any internal liquidity. That means the rule of internal liquidity was not being observed by this one. So because of that, this first leg that is outside here will be what we call secondary inducement. Now I will explain it later with diagram before we go into chart. Now let me explain it with diagram first. Okay. So now we have two types of inducement. We have up to three types of inducement. But firstly, we have what we call primary inducement. We have internal inducement. Internal inducements. We have secondary inducements. So these are the three types of inducement that we have. Now I will explain how three of them works. Now I will explain it. So these are the major three types of inducement that we have, that we trade based on what inducement or based on liquidity. Now, if these are the types of liquidity we have in defining area of what validate or area of interest, if these are the things that we have, now we define what we call primary point of interest and how it's being formed. A primary point of interest, according to our primary zone, we said primary point of interest is the first area of BMS that market show before giving any move, either buy or sell. Same as what primary inducement. Now, if market is, let's take for example, market is on downtrend, giving us a lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high. Now, as market gave a lower low, it's trying to give us a lower high to the upside. Since we are on downtrend, you should understand. Now, since market is trying to give us something like this, now let's take for example, you get to SC, give us a minor BMS. Now, this first area where market give us this first BMS, this high, now we see it on chart so that you will not be calling some kind of unsupported range a BMS. So we see that on chart. Now this first area of BMS is what we call the high is what we call primary inducement. This high is what we call primary inducement. So anytime market is coming for primary inducement, that means market, you will not look for your point of interest or area of what? Area to sell until price take this high for primary what inducement. That means your point of interest is within this former high, that inducement high, and this recent high. That means your point of interest is within this area. This is what we call primary inducement. This is the idea of what primary inducement. Now, what we call now, the second one is internal inducement. Now, internal inducement, that is internal structure. You understand that here there's complete mitigation. Note, we have already talked about the mitigation so that you not confuse yourself. So there's complete mitigation. If there's no complete mitigation, that's different. There's complete mitigation here in terms of liquidity. So this basically this liquidity point of interest, these are what we learn in this mentorship. Other things will be giving you in weekly commentary. Believe me, with any of the things that we have seen here, that is enough to make you profitable 100%. Now, you have your internal structure. Now, before market takes out this last low here, so once you take it out, it's no longer internal, it becomes a range structure, according to what I taught you guys. You understand that this was our last low, lower low. That is our last lower low, lower high, our new recent lower low, our recent lower high. The market made a lower low. Now, since market made a lower low, now this first high that is being created after first lower low can serve as what we call inducement. That is what we call, now we talk about second internal inducement. This is what we call secondary inducement. When market take out this high and use this area to sell, we call it what? Secondary inducement. Most times it's always in line with our secondary zone, either breaker or when we're talking about reclaim block and all. So it's always in line with that area. Then market will use it to sell. It will use this first high, this first leg as what? Liquidity. It will use this first leg as what? Liquidity. Then it will sell from here. So market will give something like this. It can decide to give a little lower here, then give something like this, a lower low. So this is what we call inducement. So market induced this very high before giving us a lower low. First inducement. But if now, let's say after giving this first leg here, instantly giving this first leg, it retraces back, boom, creates this first leg of inducement, then drop down. This is still inducement. This is still what? Inducement. Now, that is what we call, these are what we call secondary inducement. Now, our idea of primary internal inducement is this. Now let's use another diagram. Now let's take, for example, lower low, a lower high. A lower low is formed. Okay. Okay, let me say something here. Okay, now let's take, for example, this is how market formed from this move here. Let's take, for example, this is how market formed this move here. Now you understand, this is a lower low, a BMS to the downside. A BMS to the downside. Market gives us a break of structure to the downside. So since the market gives us a break of structure to the downside, this is what you have to understand. Now, it is giving us a corrective wave to the upside. It's giving us a corrective wave to the upside. Now, after giving us a corrective wave, so that you see everything clearly. Now, after giving us a corrective wave to the upside, after giving us a market now gave us a little range structure BMS, first range structure BMS here, before giving us this what? Internal BMS here, on the main BMS here, that will give us reason that it will take out this last low here. Now, when it takes this low, Now you will notice that before it took this low, it created this little area. And let's say, for example, there's what imbalance above it. There's imbalance above this area. Now, the idea of internal inducement. This is the last internal structure we have here. This lower low and lower high. This is the only internal structure we have here. And it's a major internal structure. Why? Because it took a little high here. So that means it's an SC candle, a sponsored candle. Are you getting my point? Now, this is what the only internal structure we have here. Or it can decide to form two here. It can decide to form two, depending on how market form it. You should understand. Now, this is what we call the last internal structure of BMS. So now, after market form now a BMS to the downside, after market from a BMS to the downside, let's take, for example, it creates a lower low here, a lower low, then give something like this. This area is what we call internal BMS. This is what we call internal inducement. This very high is what we call internal inducement. This very high is what we call internal inducement. Or if there's a little range structure within this body of this little move here. So depending on how market reads them, even if it reads it in terms of primary inducement within this range, within this lonely range only, so it reads it up to the SC of this area, is still what we call internal inducement. So market use the internal structure here to create a lower low. Market use the internal structure here to create a lower low. So you must understand, firstly, where market gives you the first BMS and mitigation. So without mitigation, your structure is incomplete. Without mitigation, it will be seen somewhat wrong or fake break of structure. So that you will not be calling any move fake break of structure. Without what? Mitigation, and which we have done already. So all those areas, whenever market is giving us a move, is giving us what? Imbalance within those moves, a hanging range. We talk about that, how to know those type of things. That's why we have what we call Wyckoff model. So Wyckoff model will be able to what? Define those things. So we talk about it. So that is that. Now, when we learn about Wyckoff and all, now after markets induce an area, induce liquidity that you're looking for. That is when you start looking for what? Wyckoff, or as market is approaching it, before market break it, that's when it start forming. Before market induce that area, that's when it start forming what? Wyckoff distribution. So once it induce it, it will break structure. This is how market would form schematic or Wyckoff, which will be learned. That is how market works. So that is what the third type of inducement that we have. That is the third type of what? Inducement that we have. Internal, primary, and secondary inducement. Now take, for example, this area, this market create a higher high here. Now after a higher high, that means we're in uptrend as far as prices what concerned. Now we go to weekly. From weekly, where we have the major range is this, where market gives us the last pullback is this area. That means within the internal structure range, this is our last what? Internal structure range. The main internal structure range. This leg is our last what? Internal structure range. Then these two here is what we call internal inducement. If market read these two before buying, is what we call the internal inducement. If market read these two before buying, these are what we call internal inducement. So let's say, for example, market do something after this little buy, boom, read these two, buy. These are what we call internal inducement. These are what we call internal inducement. That is the general idea of what internal inducement. So by that for internal inducement. Now let's take, for example, as market is selling, when market gives us what? validation of the sell here based on model and all. Now, market gave us what a BMS to the downside, telling us that we are not going to create a higher high again. Now, as market gave us that BMS to the downside, they're telling us we are ready to sell to what the former range, internal inducement, to sell to the what former range. Now, since market has told you that, now your first idea is this: after market now create a lower low, you just now have to what take a little sell, market create a lower high. So after creating a lower high, now market create a lower low. This means we have gotten what a break of structure to the downside. This means we have gotten what a break of structure to the downside. Now, since we have gotten a break of structure, now you understand here that there is what internal structure, a lower low, a lower high, a lower low, a lower high. Okay, this is not lower. So this is the last low we have here within the internal structure range. So since this is that, now we have to like go back to the area so that we see it clearer. Everyone follow up and all. Okay, this area. Now, since we have this little BMS around this area, telling us that we are what? Selling. Now, this is the internal structure we have. Last internal structure. Now, since we have here as last internal structure, now this very liquidity defense create that did not give a deep pullback into the former range is what we call internal inducement. So when market is coming, after market sell off to a certain level, it gives us a buy, it gives us a short buy, then it breaks this little inducement level here as a little minor BMS. So market now came back to the discount level of this former range, and there's also what inducement within it before market what. So within this little cell here, when market was selling this little cell here, there's still structure within it on lower time frame. So lower low, lower low, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high. Where market gave that first BMS, you see how market after market rated this high, or it created a little equal high. It rated it. It came to what took that very low before creating a higher high, then create a higher low, a higher high, a higher low. Then this is the idea of that internal structure. This was where mitigation stopped. So it rated all those ones that use mitigation. It rated those ones that did not mitigate market within this internal structure. So within this internal structure, this is the last low of the internal structure. You have to understand. So within the internal structure, anytime you see imbalance, anywhere at all, you see imbalance, that means that area is not mitigated. Price can use that area to buy as far as what it is imbalanced. But mostly, that's how we do trade imbalance. Now we're talking about point of interest. We always trade imbalance with some point of interest. Using only point of imbalance to trade, that can give you a huge stop loss. So that is how we do it. Now, before market gives us this little buy. Now, after market gives us this little buy, you have to understand where market gives us the first sell here within this zone, within this area. So market gives us the first sell around this area. This is the first BMS. We have all minor BMS. We have here higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high. So this high, this very high, is what the inducement level. That is the primary inducement level. Now, after that, you know this is your recent high that you're not expecting market now to take it. Within this internal structure, on daily time frame, this area is internal structure. Why we take at this low? But on this time frame, this internal structure still have primary inducement, if you understand my point. So this is what we do this way, this inducement. Now, so that I tell you people perfect it. This is that only point of interest. We don't know any other point of interest within this zone apart from SC. Is big, but that is what we know for now. So this is the point of interest that we use to sell gold. So after market, before market get to that inducement level, it starts consolidating. This consolidation we are seeing here is what a schematic. That is how what market forms. That is how what market forms. So that is that. Market will give us a lower low. Internal structural continuation. Market use internal structural continuation. Then after that, we had a lower low. A lower low. Now, after a lower low, this is the only internal structure we have. This is the only internal structure we have. But this internal structure is a weak high. It's a weak high. You see the enough consolidation that is here. If you check on lower time frame, this area lasted more than a week. So it's a weak high. So because it's a weak high, you are not going to look for your point of interest within this weak high. You're not going to look for your point of interest within that weak high. Within that very weak high. Because what? That is your what? Your weak high. So the first thing is that you are going to what primary point of interest. Primary point of interest is what where market give what the first BMS around this area. Now this is where market gives what the minor BMS. That means anything below this low, you don't look for your point of interest below this low. That means your point of interest is within this area. This is where you define your what point of interest. You notice after when prices are approaching that area, that is when you start what giving us consolidation before what a sharp move to the downside. Before a sharp move to the downside. Now around this one that you're seeing here, all these are range structure. Market can decide to form something like this. A higher high again. Let's take, for example, if it's an uptrend. You understand that market is giving deep retracement after a lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, and higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low. So market can decide to form a higher high, then a higher low here, and a higher high. That means this is what the main range. You have to understand this. That means this is the main range of this area. Since this high did not come back into this former range. Now let's take, for example, here, higher high, higher low, a higher high was formed. This little internal structure here, or primary inducement here, where market give us sign that it will sell to take out this last low was here. This is where market give us the minor breakout structure. Because market can decide to form something like this, a higher low, then a higher high, if it were to be an uptrend, if you're getting my point. So that is how market formed. But now that means this is what the inducement market needed to take. That means this is the inducement market need to take. First inducement market need to take. Now, but here you have enough liquidity void. Here you have enough liquidity void. Because you have this enough liquidity void, that means primary market will fill this imbalance completely. Market will fill this imbalance completely. So if market fill this imbalance completely, your next point of interest is within this range structure primary point of interest. Range structure, because this is kind of a range structure. It did not give a deep to this former range, but it's a what distribution. Because most times range structure is either a range distribution or just range structure. Just note it. Range structure is just kind of what is schematic, either a range distribution or a distribution or accumulation and reaccumulation. Range structure. Just note that. So because anytime market is forming what a range structure, it's either it's trying to use it to what give us to the upside or a downside. We explain that. There are some models that would cover that. Now, that is how what market moves. That is how market moves. So after that, now market gives us a sharp sell. That means this is the area we have what a breakout structure. That means this is the area we have what a primary or a minor breakout structure. This is our what minor break of structure. So since this area is our minor breakout structure, this area, so now we expect market now to create a lower low, lower high, lower low, little lower high, the real lower high after inducing this high. Then it creates a lower low, a lower high, a lower low, a lower low, a lower high. Use the internal structure continuation to continue selling again here. boom, to the downside till what? It take out this low. So after taking out this low, it continued with that kind of a little range structure since it has left the building. A range structure continuation till it give us what? A minor BMS to the upside, then give us RQ to SC candle before a continuation of buy. So as it continued the buying again, now market came back again to same primary point of interest. But this one did not touch SC, but it touched what? One of our point of what? Interest, which we will learn later. It touched what? One of our point of interest after what? Inducing this very high. So after inducing that very high, you wait for market now to rate into your point of interest. Is either market will rate this high before it start forming schematic, or after it rate the what? Inducement. Either of the two. Is either it rate or it induce liquidity before it start forming schematic, or consolidation. Anything you call it, consolidation mostly. So that is the what we use to know it, consolidation. So after it rate the liquidity or the inducement before it start forming what? Our schematic. After it read that inducement level before it start forming schematic or consolidation, or before it read it. So that's how what? Schematic is being formed. That's how what? Schematic is being formed. That's how schematic is being formed. So you have to what? With that same thing, you have to follow structure. Now, when market has not yet created a higher, this low is our lower low. This low is what? Our external liquidity. This high here is still not yet our major high. It's still not what? Our lower high. Why? Because it has not yet created a lower low. Till market creates a lower low, you can't call the high within a range a lower high, because market can decide to do something like this, create a higher high, depending on how it form it. But I'm not saying it will create a higher high again, but giving you what? An idea. So it can decide to what? Create a higher high here, a higher high, then before creating a higher low again. So that means this one is the what? The major liquidity. So that is how you understand your what? Your liquidity. That is the idea of what? Liquidity. This is the general idea of liquidity. That is all for today's class. So good luck, good trading.